Well, before I start putting things together, I just wanted to address one issue that's been brought up, and that is the alignment of the rotor to the caliper with roller bearings. There have been some cases where, depending on the type and size of roller bearing that's been installed, it throws the alignment off, which results in the rotor not being centered in the caliper. So basically what determines that alignment is the stack height, or the overall thickness of the inner bearings. This is the original ball bearing, and this is the new tapered bearing, both oriented as they would in the hub. And as you can see, there is very little, if any, difference in the height. So that is one concern I eliminated, but I will double check that before we button everything up. So before I do the test fit on the car, I just thought I'd kind of do a refresher on how this all goes together. So there's the hub without the disc, and you can see the studs for the wheel. So on the inside, you'll have the seal, the outer race of the inner bearing, and the inner race is already in there, and the spacer that goes on top of the race, right around there. Then there's the original spacer. Then there's the outer bearing, and this, of course, is the inner race. The outer race is already in the hub. And then the washer, the castle nut, new cotter pin, and then the hub. And then, of course, this will get greased up. Before we do that, we need to check the torque setting and end play. So the recommendation is to just lightly oil these. Don't grease them up. Don't put the seal in, and then put them on the car, torque everything up, and then see what we have for end play. So I'm going to get that, and so we'll switch over from the bench to the car. Okay, I'm down at the hub now. I've cleaned off the axle, and I've got my pieces that go on the hub. So first one is I'm going to put on the wheel bearing, the inner bearing. So that goes in there with the spacer. And then I've got the original spacer that goes on. And I've already got the outer race in the hub here. So let's put that on. So that part's there. I'm going to put on the outer washer. You can see the little notch there. The little tab here goes into the notch in the top of the axle itself, like that. And then we have the castellated nut that goes on. And I will just snug that up. Make sure that goes the right way. Now again, these are just lightly oiled. There's no seal in the back. And the directions for this are to torque it to about 46 foot-pounds. And my more up-to-date torque wrench doesn't go that low, so I'm going to have to rely on my old beam one here. So I'll get that in there. Actually, let's just turn that a bit, and I'll do the torque over here so I can see it better. So it says you to torque it to 46 while turning it. And now that is a bit tight. Maybe not. I'll just turn it and get it seated a bit. And just go to 46 approximately. There. Now, according to the instructions, it says if the hub starts to build resistance as you torque the nut, stop torquing the nut. Shims are required. So there's a little bit of resistance there. So I might just try to put a shim in there. So let's undo that. You can see that turns a bit more freely about there. There's a variety of thicknesses of shims here. Some of them are thicker than others. So I'm going to start with the thinnest shim to start with and go from there. I think that'll be that one. And that shim goes, and let me see where, between the bearing, between the outer bearing and the spacer. We'll take this off. So I'll put this first thin one on. And put this back on. There we go. Put the hat washer back on. And we'll tighten this back up and see where we end up at. And that's getting a bit tight. That's a bit better. Still too tight. So I'll just play around with the different thicknesses of shims, and I'll let you know how many I ended up putting on. Okay, I've played around with a number of shims now, and I have got this turning nicely at about 50 pounds of torque. So my next step, before greasing everything up, putting the seal on, I'm going to take this off. I'm going to install the rotor, and then I'm going to double check to make sure that our clearance for the caliper is still good. So there you can see, let's get that off there. I've just played with 3 different thicknesses of shim, and I don't know if you can see that in the thing here. There's all different varieties of thicknesses and what have you, so I just played with that ones until I got it to where I needed it. So I'll just put that, I'll leave those on there. And let's go over to the bench, put the rotor on, and we'll come right back. Okay, I have the rotor back on the hub, or the shims are still on there. So let's put this on. I'll put the washer on and put the nut back on. I'm not going to worry about torquing this up at the moment. I'm just going to make sure that I can still get the caliper over the rotor and it hasn't thrown off the spacing at all. Let's get the rotor out of here and slip it. There we go. Just have to remember where it bolts on. Where's the... Oops. Yeah, I'm just going to turn that out a bit so I can see better. And I'll just stick the bolts in to put it in place. All right, I'm just going to snug those up. I'll get my socket for those. Yeah, so I just want to snug these bolts up and make sure we're still good. And judging by the initial thing here, I think we're good. Now this may seem like a lot of work putting it on and off and that, but I think I would rather be safe than sorry on this. So there we go. I'll just pump the brake a couple of times. And there we go. And I think we're good to go. So I'll take this back off, get everything greased up, and all back together. All right, I'm going to start loading these bearings up. So what I'm going to be using is this Lucas extra heavy duty wheel bearing grease. I've used it before on a lot of other projects and I like the results. So how I do it is I just put a whole glob on my hand and then I just start working it in to the bearings. And I'm going to start with the inner bearing first. So I just start working this around and forcing the grease up into the rollers from the back side here. There are grease packing tools you can get. I don't have them, so I just run with what I've got. I don't know if you can see that, but the grease is starting to come up between the inner race and the cage, so that way I know the grease is getting all right inside the bearings there. So just keep doing that. Right, so I'm happy with how that is. I'm just going to put a bit more grease around the outer part of the rollers here. Just a little bit off camera here. I'm just putting some on the inner or the outer race that's already in the hub. So now I've got this all packed up with grease. I'm just going to let's move this over a bit. All right, you can see that. And I'm just going to pop that into the hub. And next up is to put the seal in. So this is the seal. So this kind of groove or cavity here is what faces inside. So I'm just going to put that over there, and I should be able to get that started. Let's see if I can get something a little flatter. There we go. Let's try that. There, I think that's going in now. So I'm just going to tap it down and around. Until that is flush with the back of the hub part. All right, so I'll just repeat that with the outer bearing. There you can see the grease is coming up between the inner race and the cage. That tells me grease is all the way through there. I'll just put a whole bunch on the outside part of that. All right, so we'll take all this back over to the car, and we can get things put back together. Okay, now I'm ready to put things back together. I'll put the first part on here, and then push that onto the seal. And that's sealed up pretty good. I am going to put a little bit of grease. Oh, just a second here, I just shoot. Well, there it is. Said I mentioned earlier to be careful with these shims, and I just about lost one, so I'll put a bit of grease on these to help them stick. Now there's also the spacer that goes by the inner bearing there. I'll put a bit of grease on need that in there. So that'll stick that to there. And I'm also going to put some grease inside that spacer. I don't know if it's actually needed, but there's the potential there. It might rotate. I'm going to do that. I'm also going to do the same on the outside a bit. And then we can slide that on. Make sure all my spacers are there, or my shims. And then I have my wheel bearing, or the outer, and I have the outer bearing that goes on. I can put my washer on. And I can put my nut back on. So I'm just going to pull these gloves off. Now I know from all the previous work that when I've torqued this up to about 50 pounds, I will have the correct setting on here. So there we go. So I've gone a little bit past the 50 foot-pounds of torque, so I can get the hole and the notch in the nut lined up, and to get the pin in, the cotter pin in there. So I'll go grab that. Okay, I have my new cotter pin. I'm going to slide that straight down. Actually, you know what? I think I'm going to come up from the bottom. There we go. And that's going to have to come out of it. And then I'm going to turn it so pull one leg one way and one leg the other way. And I can start to just pull those down. That's that one. And there we go. Next thing to do, put the dust cap on. Yep, very happy with that. I'll put the dust cap on. There we go. And I'll get all the grease cleaned off. We don't need wads of grease on that. I'll give the rotor a bit of a clean. So now that I've got that all tidied up, I can put the caliper back on again. So I'll get the all right, so there we have the new bearings installed, caliper back on, rotors in the center of the caliper, and all we have to do now, put the wheel on and go over to the other side and repeat that whole process. Well, that's another task half completed. I'll get to the other side in the next little bit here. So thanks for joining me. I hope you found this video informative. If you want to see how I took everything apart and got everything cleaned, I'll put a link to that video up top here. And if you want to see how this whole Bugeye project started, I'll put a link in the bottom corner to that video. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to share it with your friends. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget that little bell icon. Click on that, you'll get notified when the next video comes out. My name is Ian. This is the Econobox Garage. We'll see you next time.